Hey everyone, welcome back to Bryan's Mysteries and Adventures on Trail. In today's video, we are going to be discussing part 2 of The Hiker. This is the second video in the new series, Bryan's Bedtime Stories. This is going to be A Needle in a Haystack is the title of this video. For those of you that may not have seen the first episode, I'll have that link in the description. And basically a short recap of Bryan's Bedtime Stories are some stories that have come from my past, my friends hiking and camping's past, search and rescue people that I've talked to that have told me these stories. Some will be trail lore, but these are mainly stories to just fall asleep to. Most of them will have positive endings. These aren't going to be stories that you can Google or things like that. That said, that doesn't mean the stories aren't true. Things happen all the time in parks, camping, hiking trips that don't make the news or Google reports. So I bet, it'll be up to you whether you want to believe the story is true or not. A short recap to bring you all up to speed. A man named Jeff was hiking in Shenandoah National Park here in the state of Virginia. He had arbitrarily met up with some woman walking her dogs. However, during that time, they became separated after one of the dogs ran off. Unfortunately, then a major nor'eastern storm came up and was dumping tons of rain. Jeff was stranded in the middle of the park. He had no idea where he was. A bolt of lightning struck a tree nearby, and Jeff was pinned under a huge log. The storm continued to rage on, and Jeff had now been trapped for several hours. He was hoping that somebody would come looking because he was last seen with a woman that was walking the dogs. As time grew on, he just kind of looked up at the stars, thinking that this may be his last night. He was injured. He knew he was injured, but he was also worried about dehydration. He was, of course, trying to drink as much of the rainwater that he could, but he also felt like he might be bleeding, but he couldn't tell whether that was just the rainwater beating off of him or an injury, but he couldn't see down his leg because of the way the tree had pinned him to the ground. That night seemed to drag on forever. Although Jeff always loved to look up at the stars, that night he felt like they were actually comforting him. It was the only thing he had in the world, being pinned and being beaten down by the rain. But he was looking forward to morning and just praying that somebody would find him. It was roughly around 11 a.m. when he thought he heard footsteps. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw two people coming up out of the brush. He used all what he could muster to yell out to them, "Hey, I need help, I need help." They did finally see Jeff. They came up, they gave him some water, they tried to understand what he was saying, but his mind was so cloudy at this point. The two hikers tried to calm him down and assured Jeff that they were going to go and get help. For a couple of minutes, the two hikers debated whether one should stay behind and stay with Jeff. However, they both decided that they were going to go off, bring help, and then come back as soon as they could. Jeff, of course, was terrified at the thought of maybe staying another night out in the wilderness. As they were leaving, he said, "Make sure they bring something so that they can cut this tree off of me." Sadly for Jeff, he did have to spend another night out in the wilderness all by himself, which is really terrifying, especially when you're pinned under a huge log and have no idea if anyone is ever going to come back to help you. That night, Jeff was in and out of consciousness, so this actually passed the time much quicker. He seemed to awaken once more right around dawn when he saw out of the corner of his eye once again a group of hikers. This time he could tell that they were part of a search team. With what energy he had left, he immediately started calling out to them, and he noticed that they started turning in his direction. At that point, he also noticed that there was a helicopter up above and that it had positioned itself right over him. At this point, Jeff had a feeling that he was going to be rescued, although he was in a tremendous amount of pain and still in and out of consciousness. When Jeff once again reopened his eyes, he saw a whole team of people around him and a couple of men with chainsaws cutting the tree free that had pinned him now for over 2 days. They finally were able to get Jeff onto a stretcher after what seemed like hours out to an ambulance. Jeff, for the first time after being pinned under that tree, finally felt a sense of relief. As he was taken to the hospital, he kept thanking all the paramedics. When he did finally get to the hospital, they ran a battery of tests, including a CAT scan, an MRI. He couldn't believe what the doctor said to him. They said, "Jeff, aside for your He was black and blue all over, but they said aside from like one little cut that needed stitches, everything was going to heal fine. He only had a few broken fingers, a couple broken toes, no internal injuries. They said it really was a miracle that he came out of this with just the injuries that he had. Although at this point Jeff asked about his right shin because he was experiencing this nagging pain that was sharp pain. It almost felt like there was something pinning him, like a nail or something. They said, no, everything looks okay. It's probably just residual pain from the trauma. So they gave him the papers and he was able to sign out a few days later. When Jeff finally did make it back to New York City, the city seemed smaller for some reason. It was still the bustling Big Apple that he knew, but for some reason it just felt different. Jeff immediately settled back into his daily life, going to work. While all of his injuries pretty much healed, his right shin still was really bothering him. Just like he had told the doctor, it just felt like every time he took a stride forward or put any pressure on it, it felt like there was something jabbing him, and it got more and more painful. And when he touched it, it was almost like he could feel something moving around in there. Jeff stayed in New York City for the next couple of months. He was actually a little bit scared about going back out into the wilderness after his experience, plus he was still having this pain in his leg. However, he did take a few trips to upstate New York just by himself. He went on a couple of overnight backpacking and hiking trips, which he did enjoy. The weather was mild. However, due to the pain in his right leg, he just couldn't enjoy it the way he normally would. Although he did see some spectacular sunsets over the mountains and some spectacular stargazing, which always made him happy, and it was nice to sort of ease his way back into backpacking and hiking. After returning to New York City after his last backpacking trip, Jeff started falling into a state of depression. He was lonely, although he was surrounded by millions of people in the city. He was also in what seemed to be worsening pain. He did go to the hospital several times. They did a couple of imaging. They did several tests, and they said they just couldn't find anything, despite one of the doctors even saying that she could feel a lump underneath his leg, underneath the skin on his shin. They just said that it was probably a cyst or something and that it would go away. But Jeff didn't really buy this, and it just got more and more swollen and more painful. He was trying to do his normal workouts, even his upper body, but with the pain, it was just hard for him to continue anything, and this sort of aided into his depressed state. Jeff sadly had to give up one of his favorite things in the whole world, living in New York City, which was walking across the Brooklyn Bridge, then down the promenade. There's lots of little shops, places to eat. The pain had just gotten so bad in that one leg that he would just take the subway or buses anywhere he could because it was too painful for him to even walk like across the street. Then one day Jeff remembered that there was this world-renowned plastic surgeon that was a member of his gym that he worked at. The next day Jeff took a cab to work, nervously approached him. The doctor couldn't have been nicer. He immediately offered Jeff to come into his practice. Jeff, of course, immediately took the doctor up on this. The doctor immediately said that he couldn't believe Jeff had been walking around like this. He could see that there was serious inflammation. There was definitely something wrong. And this doctor just did what's known as an exploratory surgery right on his leg. Within minutes, he found the problem. There was a leather sewing needle embedded inside of his leg. Literally, the doctor looked at him and said, "It's a needle in a haystack." Jeff was like, "How did that even get there?" The doctor said, "You must have fallen on it somehow, and the body will immediately enclose a foreign object and then try and push it out, so that's why you are feeling that pain." A leather needle is much bigger than a standard sewing needle. So for over a month, Jeff had been walking around with this needle, basically jabbing him into his leg, and the doctor even said that it was partially in his muscle, so he couldn't imagine the pain that he was going through. Jeff was still so dumbfounded by this. The last time he had sewn was in home ec class in 7th or 8th grade. He did recall carrying a sewing kit for his gear. However, he didn't remember ever using it, so he still just never knew how this could have happened. In any event, he was just so happy that it was out. he was getting back to his life of going out to the outdoors, having fun. He decided to take a trip back to Shenandoah National Park. Not only had he not really gotten to explore it the first time, but he never found out what happened to the woman that he had met that day walking her dogs. He wanted to inquire about her, as he thought that she was a very interesting woman. He wanted to make sure that she was okay with her dogs as well. He forgot to ask the paramedics when they were taking him to the hospital. He also wanted to explore the park. It was one of the parks that he had always wanted to see. So with that, mid-June of the next year, he was headed back down to Virginia. However, unfortunately for Jeff, his luck just never seemed to get any better. Somewhere between New York City and southern Jersey, right around southern Jersey, his car started making some weird noises. It was an older SUV, had close to 200,000 miles on it. Before Jeff knew it, his car had broken down on the side of the road, and unfortunately Jeff was not the most mechanically inclined person. He did try fiddling with it for a little bit, but there was nothing he could do, and he knew he was stranded. He did for a while try and flag down passing cars. However, no one seemed to want to stop, and he couldn't blame him. He probably wouldn't have stopped for anyone either, he thought to himself. Jeff waited by the car for a little while longer, but at some point he just started packing up his camping and hiking gear. He left a little note on the car. It was around sunset. He started walking, but he knew that he would be able to travel further at night because it was cooler. The temperatures had been getting pretty hot, although it was only around mid-June at this point. Jeff walked throughout the night, and by morning there was actually a good amount of traffic passing him by. One car finally stopped, but Jeff actually told the driver that he didn't need assistance. Something had come over Jeff, and he had decided that he was going to walk the rest of the way and hike through various trails to get back to Shenandoah National Park. He had no idea how he was going to do this or the various trails and roads that he would need to take. However, this was what Jeff decided to do. He figured he would just make a call and have his truck towed to the next town and take care of that later. For the next couple of days, Jeff walked throughout different roads and various trails that some of the people pointed him towards. He saw a lot of new things that he had never been in any of these areas, so for him he was just enjoying himself, having fun, looking up at the night stars when he could at night. He had all his camping gear and all his hiking stuff, so it was just like an extended road trip on foot for him. The next 2 days were very strenuous. The weather had been getting hotter and hotter. The water sources were getting a little bit further in between, although in this part of the world it does rain a lot, so he was staying pretty hydrated, but at one point he did get turned around and was a little lost. Thankfully not too bad, and right around that time he saw a sign that said "Welcome to Virginia." At that point he also met up with some other hikers. They continued to hike down towards Shenandoah National Park. These people had been from Virginia. They knew which trails and what direction to go to, so this was just a really good chance of luck for Jeff. They all hiked together and camped together for the next night. Jeff the next morning got up and continued his hike. By now he was in Shenandoah National Park. He saw something off in the distance which he couldn't quite make out, but as he got closer, he noticed that it was a woman sitting on a rock tying her shoe. He had to go that way anyway, so he just kept walking towards her. As he got closer, he thought, that really does look like the woman that I'd been talking to before the accident. Jeff honestly felt a little uncomfortable, a little nervous. He wasn't even sure if this woman would remember him. They only spent maybe half hour, 40 minutes talking, but although when she saw him, she immediately jumped up and said, "Jeff, how are you?" She was actually in the park staying with some friends and family that had come to visit her. Jeff went back to the campsite with her. They all just sat around talking, having food, telling their stories, recounting what had happened. Thankfully, the woman had gotten her dogs back, and the two just cozied up, roasting marshmallows, telling stories. They just felt this instant connection, and they both admitted to one another that they had felt an attraction the first time they had met. She was obviously very concerned when she couldn't find Jeff that day, and she had alerted authorities, although she wasn't sure that he was absolutely lost. In any event, the pair really hit it off. They started going on camping and road trips together. Jeff eventually moved out of New York City. He moved down to Virginia. He got a job in the area. They bought this old van and retrofitted it so that they could take long road trips and camping trips. They explored all over Virginia, West Virginia, into the Midwest. They just were having a great time. She was working as a online broker of some kind for some bank, so she could do it on the road, and Jeff had also gotten a similar type job, which was great because it allowed them to have grand adventures together while still having a source of income. They eventually took some more serious hiking and camping trips. They made it all the way out west. They did parts of the Pacific Crest Trail. On their way back, they also hiked parts of the Continental Divide Trail. They explored areas in Colorado. They hiked the north rim of the Grand Canyon. Just all these amazing hiking trips. And by the end of the second year, they had hiked over 3,500 miles. Before they went home, Laurie really wanted to see one last thing and hike one more area, somewhere in West Virginia, but she was told it had these magnificent waterfalls, beautiful trails, and Jeff had never seen it either. So they got some maps out and headed towards the direction they thought these falls were in and the general area that they thought they were in. They found a good camping spot for the night, and they decided that they would get up at dawn, pick up the trail which they believed would take them to these waterfalls, or at least the big waterfall that Laurie always wanted to see. They hit the trail early in the morning, and before they knew it, they had reached one of the most magnificent waterfalls outside of places like Yosemite and other national parks. They didn't see anybody else around, and it was just an awe-inspiring sight. This was, of course, before the age of smart cell phones. Laurie had a wonderful camera that she tried to get down and take a picture closer to the waterfall. In her efforts, she ended up dropping the camera. Jeff told her to let it go, but Laurie was insistent, and she started climbing down a massive rock on the face of the waterfall. Unfortunately, right as she took one of the second steps, she slipped on some grassy moss, slipped down about 15 feet of rock, was able to stand herself up on a ledge, but now she was trapped on a ledge almost 20 feet below the top, and Jeff only had a small rope and a few carabiners with him. They were in the middle of nowhere, and it was at least a 6-mile hike back to their camp. Jeff knew he was going to have to rescue her himself. He got out his equipment that he did have and started anchoring into the wall, but he really didn't know much about climbing. He had only done some indoor climbing and a few outdoor trips, but it had been years. Jeff started to descend, but then he realized that the better option would probably just to throw her down a rope, anchor to some trees, use what equipment he did have, then pull her up himself. He yelled down to Laurie, and she did not seem to be injured. They went over the plan. He threw her down the rope, and before he knew it, he was trying to pull her up. This proved to be a lot harder than he thought, and he knew that she was going to have to help by climbing some. Thankfully, Laurie was a very experienced climber, and this was basically what ended up saving her life, and of course, Jeff pulling her up as well. She had a few close calls, slipping and falling here and there. She finally made it up to the top. The couple embraced. Then they looked back at the rope that Jeff had tied around the tree, and you could see it was all frayed, and it was just right about to break. They just couldn't believe their luck, and they were just so happy to have made it out of this sticky situation. At this point, the couple was well ready to go home. The couple eventually did make their way back to the East Coast. They built a small house in southeastern Virginia. It's kind of one of those little tiny houses that you see. However, they absolutely loved it. They kept going on their camping and overnight trips. And one day, Jeff took her to this nice secluded area in this town that was very rustic and old, sort of like an old Manhattan. Jeff, being an endless romantic, got down on one knee and asked her to marry him. The two got engaged and spent that holiday season with Jeff's family living in North Carolina. It was a beautiful white Christmas. Laurie had always wanted to live on a farm. Jeff always wanted to live on a farm or ranch himself too. The two took a trip out to the Midwest. They found this beautiful piece of property in eastern Montana. They were able to get several hundred acres at a wonderful price. Both their families helped them out doing some renovations on the farmhouse. They got a chicken coop. built a bunch of different barns. It was an absolutely beautiful property, and for them it was just a dream come true. And they are actually still living there to this day. They have horses now. They have a beautiful farmhouse that they've built up. It's almost 5,000 square acres, a beautiful porch that they go and sit out in the morning. From what I understand, they're still taking hiking and camping trips. They both still are very into the great outdoors, but they still both say that those first couple years of their hiking and camping definitely brought them some of the most close calls, but also most adventurous times that they have had. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all for all your wonderful support. Special thank you to co.ag for providing the background music. Hopefully I'll see you all in the next one. Take care. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking with me to the end. If you would like to submit a story for these episodes, please email me. I'll have the email in the description. Anybody that wants to support the channel, everything goes a long way. I have my PayPal and Venmo and address all in the description. Thank you so much for all your help. If you have any suggestions, you can email me or leave me a comment. I love hearing from you all. I am going to be doing some new shorts, like short YouTube videos. Those I'm just going to be trying out to see. They're going to be all kinds of things. Probably not mystery things because it's too much to put in a 50-second video. For those of you that don't want to watch them, you don't have to. I'm just trying it out. If you guys have any ideas for them, I'd love to hear your suggestions. I am currently working on several cases that have taken a lot longer for research for missing hikers. Those will be posting this week. As always, I welcome any constructive feedback or critiques. I love hearing your suggestions. Please let me know how you all are doing, if you have any trips coming up, if you have any questions about gear or planned routes or apps to use. I'm always willing to help any way I can. Hopefully I'll see you next time. Take care.